Hey everyone, in today's video I'll be sharing some terrifying true stories from Reddit. We're still on our way to hitting 1,000 subscribers, so sit back, relax, and don't forget to subscribe. He had plans for me. So yesterday I was at my sister's house with my mom watching my son and nephews play in the yard. One of my nephews, Harrison, was picking bark off of a tree when I remembered an odd encounter I had as a kid. I said, "So weird," out loud, thinking about the encounter. My mom inquired what I was talking about, so I told her. When I was a kid, I was hanging out at the Pinecone Forest, which was what the neighborhood kids called a small patch of trees on the side of the road. I was picking bark off of one of the trees to pass some time, waiting for my friend Frankie to finish his homework and come out to play. Out of nowhere, it seemed, a guy came up to me. I could smell him before I saw him. He smelled like stale cigarette smoke. I was kind of scared when I looked at him. He wasn't very old, but he had a very lazy eye that was cloudy, and his teeth and fingernails were stained yellow. My mom taught me to be nice to people even if they don't look like me. So I faked a smile and said hello. "What are you doing?" he asked me. The smell of his breath was the worst. I'm picking the bark off of this tree. You shouldn't do that. It's like picking off the tree's skin." "How would you feel if someone picked off your skin?" he said, while lightly pinching my arm with his sharp yellow nails. "I don't know," I replied, and took my arm back. Just then, Frankie's mom called for me out the door and told me to come wait inside. I didn't think anything of the whole thing at the time. When I told my mom about it, she had this look of, I don't know, guilt maybe? She said that it's probably time I know the whole story. She thought I forgot about the whole encounter, so she never brought it up to me. First, you should know that the neighborhood I grew up in was a small, tight-knit community. Everyone knew everyone, and there was no reason for an outsider to come unless they knew someone there. Anyway, here's what happened with this guy. Frankie's mom, Sonia, noticed a white van with no windows parked on the side of the road. How cliché, right? She didn't recognize it, but figured maybe it was a visitor for a neighbor. Sonia said, or rather told the police, that the van had been there all morning and afternoon. She was kind of keeping an eye on it. She said that she just had a bad feeling. Her house had a huge window in front facing the Pinecone Forest, and the van was parked next to it. She saw me waiting for Frankie and kept a constant eye on the van while holding the phone, just in case. She saw the man exit the back of the van and walk up to me. As soon as she saw him grab my arm and pinch me, she called the cops. That was when she called me into her house. The cops stopped the guy just outside of my neighborhood. In the back of his van were binoculars, a Polaroid camera, and pictures of me taped all over the walls and ceiling. Me at school, me at my grandparents' house, at the bank with my mom. Just me, everywhere I went. But that's not all. He had a key to a storage unit on him. Inside the unit, they found a cabinet full of knives, a lot of knives, paring knives, a butcher cleaver, a thin flay knife, a melon bowler, and just various knives of all shapes and sizes. There were also a few anatomy books, obstetrical equipment, duct tape, and 10 empty 5-gallon buckets. In the middle of the unit was an old bed that was used to restrain mental patients. So it had wrists and ankle straps, and the entire inside of the unit was covered in plastic wrap. My mom said he was in a high-security mental institution for the criminally insane, last she heard. So that's pretty creepy to me, and I figured I'd share. The Moonlight Motel. This encounter takes place several years ago in a remote part of the Australian outback. For a bit of background, I'm a pretty built 6'2" dude, and I was around 26 years old at the time. I was on a road trip with a mate traveling around the central Queensland outback in my old semi-reliable Nissan X-Trail. We're both science and zoology nerds and had heard about this amazing dinosaur trail out this way, which is basically a grouping of 3 areas that have previous dino bone discoveries and still have fossils, as well as a seriously awesome dinosaur track with preserved foot imprints. We were staying at a place 3 hours from Linton for a couple days and were pretty keen to check out this trail, so we made the decision to do the 6-hour round trip in a day. We were pretty ambitious and stupid back then. We left at 9 a.m. the next morning, car packed with lunch, several liters of water, and my trusty GPS. It was a long drive, halfway around. My aircon decided to cark it. If any of you have visited Australia in the summer, you would know it's brutally hot, so I'm sure you can imagine the 3-hour trip there without air conditioning. To make matters worse, my GPS also stopped working, as the map software didn't recognize the area we were in. Luckily, I had an old Reef X in my back seat. But it was pretty tough to revert to map reading when you're used to a computer screen telling you where to go, especially given we were talking the Australian outback here, complete with dirt tracks for roads and very limited signage. Finally, we make it to the trail and kick around there for a couple of hours, then decide to make the trip back as it was starting to get later in the afternoon and we didn't want to be driving back in the dark. As we're about to leave, this gnarly old guy, who appeared to be an employee of the trail company, dressed in all khaki camouflage gear, asks us about where we were from and where we were heading. He gave me the stink eye when I was vague with the details, and my mate told him the name of the town we were staying. He took a real liking to my mate, and he laughed when he told him about our lengthy journey in. Apparently, we had taken the wrong turn, and there was a much quicker way to get back that would save about an hour off of the trip. We jumped at the directions he gave us, all verbal, which we wrote down. Off we went on our merry way, thinking how lucky we were to have met this old dude who gave us some sweet intel on a shortcut home. Based on the directions he gave us, we went winding along several roads in an area I had never been in, and eventually settled straight on this narrow dirt road. We were supposed to reach an intersection after about half an hour, take a right, and continue on that road until we got to a main highway that would take us back. After an hour and a half of driving on this dirt trail, we still hadn't reached this intersection. I was starting to freak out, thinking we'd missed the turn, but my mate was completely chilled out, and we're sure we'd get there eventually. I think he thought I was driving too slowly, but there are kangaroos out there, and those things are seriously dangerous, especially if you hit one. We had been traveling for a while now. It was getting later and later in the day, and it got to the point where the petrol in the tank was only a quarter full. There were no houses, other roads, or cars in sight, and I was really not comfortable with where this was headed. The middle of nowhere, in a remote area in this wasteland, that is the Australian outback. There weren't even any trees, only this dirt road and desolate dry bushland shrubs as far as the eye can see. I stopped the car and tell my mate to get the binoculars out of the back to take a look around in case he can see any landmark. He obliges and could just make it out of the house-like structure not too far in the distance, so he made a decision to head for that. We figured it could be a house and maybe the people would be nice enough to give us some petrol to top us up. As we neared the structure, it became apparent that it was not a house at all. We pulled up out front and see that it's an old caravan that has been burned to a shell from the inside out. It's still got the 3 black and partial walls up though, so we can't see all the way in. And it looks like someone has been there recently because animal bones are strung up all over the place and a cow skull at the entrance to the caravan. Some of the animal bone things even have grass or horsehair woven into them, and they were arranged like decorations. Then, we see this hand-painted sign that's been stalked into the ground, with the words Moonlight Motel on it. My alarm bells are ringing loud and clear. I nudge my friends to say, let's get the fuck out, but he's distracted by something in the distance. It's a car, coming in the direction we had just come from. It's kicking up a ton of dust, which indicates that it's coming towards us fast. It's at this point that we both hear this creepy, scratching sound coming from the burned-out caravan, like someone is scratching at the wall from the inside. I move a little closer to try and see what it is, and there is a person in there, peeking out at us from a hole in the damaged wall. Then, this childlike voice that is obviously a grown man imitating little girl giggles, and says, "Are you here to play with me?" My mate and I both look at each other and book it out of there, back to the inner sanctum of the X Trail. Just as I'm about to reverse out, the other car stops just behind my car with the high beams on. I can't see the driver, but they're in my way, so I can't reverse out from where I'm stationed. I have no choice but to drive forward and turn around that way, narrowly missing the staked motel sign. As we're turning to leave, the driver starts blaring the horn, just hammering it for no reason at all. I just speed off, back in the direction we came, and the other car doesn't follow. It's getting a twilight at this stage, and pretty dangerous to be out on these country roads once it's dark because of the kangaroo situation, but we're feeling a bit better as we manage to navigate our way back to where we came from, the diner trail, and we even start to joke about what had happened. The person in the other car was probably just honking at us to get our attention, to help with directions or something. I pull into the parking lot and go to the front desk of the company that runs the tours. I explained that we had gotten lost on our way back to town and we were staying at. The lady was kind enough to give us enough petrol for the ride back. I couldn't help myself and mentioned that her workmate is a real jerk for giving us those weird directions. And she gives me a weird look and asks me to describe the guy. I do. And her face goes funny, and she says that man does not work here. I saw him talking with the tourists today. My boss had to ask him to leave. He kept trying to get the details of where people were staying and telling him that he had vacancies at this place and they could stay there, the Moonlight Motel. So creepy old dude pretending to give helpful directions to a couple of city folk to trap and potentially murder. Let's not meet. One decision. When I was a teenager, I was goth. Black hair, black clothes, black makeup, even had a pair of combat boots. My friends and I, in typical goth fashion, hung out at the local cemetery. We started going as a joke, but soon discovered we liked the peace we found there. That all changed one night. My friend called to see if I wanted to hang out, and I did. None of our other friends were available. They were either working or recovering from partying the night before, so we were on our own. My friend picked me up and we drove up to the cemetery. We were hanging out, smoking cigs, and BSing about the latest issues she was having with her boyfriend, when we noticed at the top of the hill we were on, about 100 feet away, a bonfire had been lit. You have to understand that this cemetery is about a block off campus of a major university, and it's not uncommon for college students to go there to party. My friend and I sighed, knowing that we would have to get going soon. It was illegal to be in the cemetery after dark, and we knew the police would show up because some jerks had decided they needed a bonfire. We decided to finish our cigs and then take off. Just then, the most horrible stench came wafting down the hill from the direction of the bonfire. My friend gagged and covered her mouth. I groaned and said, "What the hell?" My friend shook her head, saying, "I don't know what they're doing. Let's just leave." We get in the car and one of us suggested, I honestly don't remember who, maybe we should just go up and see what they're doing? My stomach turned and a cold shiver went through my body. My friend must have had the same feeling because at the same time we both said, "No, we should leave." My friend turned the car on, switched on her headlights, put the car in reverse, and looked over her shoulder before starting to back up. I was still looking up the hill. A figure stepped in front of the bonfire. I could only see a silhouette, but I was sure whoever it was watching us. A feeling of terror hit me and I said, "Go, go, go, go," getting louder and more panicked with each word. My friend looked back up the hill for a second, and just as the figure took a step towards us, she slammed on the gas and peeled out, going in reverse down the hill. She rammed the gear shift into drive and we were out. We didn't say anything for a while until she said, "What the hell were they burning?" I shook my head. "I don't know." She dropped me off at home and I went to bed. The next morning I woke up and went out to the kitchen. My mom was there drinking her morning coffee and I joined her. We talked about her job for a bit when she suddenly comes out with, Did you hear what happened last night?" I shrug and say no. I had just gotten up. She tells me that a woman she worked with was kidnapped from the parking garage. "Oh my God," I say. "Did they find her?" "Yes, but too late," she replies. "Whoever took her had raped and murdered her. They found her this morning up in the cemetery. He had tried to dispose of her body in a bonfire." I froze. My brain was going a mile a minute, the realization slowly creeping up. What that smell was. Needless to say, I never hung out at the cemetery at night again. I think back to our decision to leave instead of investigating the fire. That one decision could have changed everything. In the hills, no one can hear you cry. This is actually my stepmom's best friend's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up. I'm hoping telling someone else's will open me to it a little more. My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister, 3 years older, and I this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. It was my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, we're going to call her Macy, grew up as a kind of a privileged teen in the 70s, and her mom had moved their family over here, the States, from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd. Popular, stereotypical, etc. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff. Hiking, fishing, sailing. There's even a hilarious set of pictures of them camping. My stepmom has raccoon eyes and looks like she hates everything. Anyways, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots. You know, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space. But there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path, because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you asked my stepmom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out and she groaned until Lily, begrudgingly, said okay they would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started bitching again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road, and after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window and the girls looked in through the passenger's side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in, and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always says that was the point it hit her what a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger's seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16/17ths, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was youngish, strong-looking, and had a 1 on both of them. So they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information, and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack log cabin-looking place right there in a clearing of trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it, saying, "I'll be right back, don't get out," and he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exited the truck with her. So they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me. And they wandered around, looking at it, hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature, so she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried red-brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her shit, and seeing it, my stepmom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point and just booked it off the side of property into the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would heart it and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is the 70s. No cell phones. There was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours, when dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom, predictably, started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. If this guy is still alive, he's really old, but still, let's just not meet. Backcountry hike turns terrifying. I've never posted to Reddit before. This is my first time. My brother suggested I tell my story here. I am a 33-year-old white female from Los Angeles. 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I, as planned for 5 years, turned 30, sold everything we owned, including my car, took his Trailblazer and decided to just travel around the States and Canada. I guess you could call us backpackers, as we tend to chase good weather, find a state park, and backcountry hike into the wilderness for days at a time. My brother likes to joke that we are anti-establishment hippies. We don't necessarily live off the grid, but between the two of us, we have one prepaid phone we use for emergencies or checking in with family and friends, and one MacBook which I use for work. I'm a freelance writer, content creator, and I am on retainer with robotics company. I mostly write boring white papers or web content. The whole point of our living situation is to live debt-free and have as few bills as possible. I only use free Wi-Fi, so 2 times a week we have to go to a city with a Starbucks. This background info is only important so you know more about who we are and how simply we live. Neither of us is involved in social media and know very little of Reddit or Instagram or use any apps. Because our phone isn't a smartphone, we don't even text. Last summer, we decided to do some backcountry hiking in Arkansas. It's one of those states you don't ever really hear about other hikers visiting, but we read that it had some beautiful natural landscape. It does. The rules at this particular park were pretty lax. We didn't need a permit. There were a few basic laws guidelines, but there was no check-in needed. We had all the basics and had planned to do a 6-day hike, 3 in, 3 out. The whole time we were out there, we didn't see or hear another soul. But on day 1, we were prepping to move off trail and find a camping spot as it was getting near dusk. 1/2 mile off trail is usually the standard for us. We took what looked like kind of an animal trail, and about 1/2 mile out we saw a green 2-person tent. It was almost camouflaged in the foliage, so we came on it almost by accident. Some backpackers prefer privacy, others are more social. We're the more social type. We've had some great experiences camping near other backpackers, sharing stories, food, and a joint or two. We were around 30 yards away from the tent. It was zipped closed. So my boyfriend shouted a greeting to make our presence known. No movement and no sound. We assumed green tent guy either wasn't around or didn't want to be bothered, so we started off in a new direction to get some distance between us. We camped, never heard a peep. We moved along the next morning, completely forgetting about green tent guy, until nearing the end of day 5 on our trek back. We were again looking for a spot to camp off the trail when we came up on the green tent again. This isn't that unusual, but normally backcountry hikers keep moving, so we really weren't expecting it. The tent flap was open, so my boyfriend yells his greeting again, and nothing. My boyfriend wants to go check it out, saying it's weird and maybe someone is hurt. I didn't like the idea from the get-go, because even though we hadn't had any bad experiences personally, we'd heard enough stories from other backpackers about hermits and mountain men that want privacy, carry guns, etc. But my boyfriend assured me we'd be fine, and if all else fails, offer him some weed to keep the peace and we'd go on our way. As soon as we get within 20 yards of the place, the smell of decomposition is intense. My boyfriend has been hailing his greeting over the last 20 yards, and once the smell hits him, he stops and turns to me and says, "What if we find a dead body?" My skin crawled. I was immediately afraid. I've never seen a dead body before and don't want to. The closer we got to the tent, the worse the smell got. I knew for sure we were going to walk in and see some old camper's rotting corpse. What we found was worse than that. Outside the tent was a dead doe's legs, all 4 of them, covered in flies. It looked like the legs had been cut most of the way and then ripped off the rest of the way. It was a mess. Inside was the body and head of the deer, but the middle portion was swaddled in a blue fleece blanket that was blood-soaked at the bottom where the legs used to be. It was laying on its side, bottom facing the tent entry. The tail had been cut off, and the anus/vagina was covered in dried blood and a gape, like something had been penetrating it. The same with its mouth. The bottom portion was bent down at a scary, broken-looking angle. The tent was open so we could see everything without having to go inside. Not that we would have anyway, because at this point the smell was almost debilitating. There was a dirty, almost empty clear bottle of Jergens baby oil and a stained green and white fringe kitchen towel. That was it. I immediately started crying and begged him to go. All he could muster was, "What the fuck?" And we turned and ran. We ran to the trail and jogged down it for as far as we could go until dusk was fully on us and we had to set up camp. We didn't go very far off the trail, and neither of us slept. We didn't start a fire or use headlamps after full dark. We just sat up whispering to each other, going over and over what we had just seen. Every little noise startled us. It was like our brains were on red alert. I kept thinking any moment a dead deer rapist would come back to his tent, see our footprints or something, know we were there and track us back to our tent. I've never been so scared in my entire life. Just before dawn, we tore down and started out. My boyfriend stopped at the ranger station on our way out of the park to report what we had seen. The ranger was a young guy around our age, and he looked as freaked out by our story as we were telling it. He wrote most of it down, and my boyfriend showed him on a map approximately where it had been. He asked if we knew how the deer was killed, and at that point we hadn't even thought about it. We just assumed it had been shot, but because of the blanket we didn't see a wound, but we weren't exactly giving it an autopsy either. We have since shortened our backcountry hikes to a maximum of 4 days. We've also been a lot less eager to call out to other campsites and have never approached another unmanned tent again. I will never help a random stranger out in the street, no matter how convincing they are. This happened to me back in 2007. I was 9 years old and my brother was 14. My mom had sent us out of the house with about $30 to go to a movie and maybe get a bite to eat afterwards. After watching the movie, it was getting pretty dark and I was ready to go home, but my brother wanted to get something to eat first, and we agreed to walk to McDonald's, which was only a couple blocks from the movie theater. On our way there, we were stopped and approached by a man. He had a friendly smile plastered on his face, and he was holding his child's hand. There didn't seem to be anything off about this man. He was average-looking and seemed to be nothing more than a father having a day out with his son. "Hey, do you two think you could give my son and I a hand real quick?" he asked. "We need help loading a mattress onto the back of our truck. The truck is just up the road." "Sorry, but we don't really have time," my brother said. It was at this time I noticed the little boy. He was about 8 years old and he looked abnormally thin. He had a blank expression on his face and wore clothes that were much too big for him. I turned my attention back to the man, who was now mumbling to my brother about how it would only take a second. My brother kindly declined again. Being the helpful kid that I was, I joined in with the man and tried to persuade my brother that we should help them out. I turned to my brother, who was now staring down at the little boy. My brother had a disturbed expression on his face as he looked down at the child. The child stared back at my brother, blankly. I didn't understand why my brother had that look on his face. He grabbed my hand and said, "I think that's my mom over there." He pulled me, and we began walking away from the man. I didn't understand what was going on and why my brother had just lied about our mom being there. He didn't let go of my hand and practically dragged me until we were a far distance away from the man and his son. I looked back and could still see the man holding his son's hand. Only now he wasn't smiling anymore. He had a look of fury on his face, and he yanked the little boy by the arm and they walked away. I pulled away from my brother's grasp and bombarded him with questions. He shushed me and pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. Tink, he dialed in a number and began pacing around nervously while talking on the phone. I remember the police showing up and my mom came soon after. She took me home, but my brother was left with the police. I asked my mother what was going on, and she said that the police were just questioning my brother because the man we had encountered was dangerous. That's all she told me, and I went to bed. By the next morning, I had almost completely forgotten about the incident and things went back to normal. It wasn't until a few days ago that these memories flooded back into my mind. I decided to call my now 22-year-old brother to get some answers. When I brought the ordeal back up him, he finally gave me the information I wanted to know. And now that I know everything, I understand how fucking terrifying our encounter with the man truly was. My brother told me that while the man was constantly trying to convince us to come with him, he happened to look at the little boy. The little boy then looked at my brother with his eyes filled with terror and mouthed the words, "I'm not his son. Please help me." Then his expression went back to being completely blank, almost as if he had never said anything at all. This was why he had become so freaked out and snatched me away. When he called the police, they hurried down and he described the man the best he could. They couldn't do much with the little information my brother had given because we hadn't even seen the car that the man supposedly had. My brother told me that a few weeks into the investigation they had found the little boy who was with the man dead. His body had been cruelly dumped in the woods. The cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. If my brother and I had gone with the sicko, we likely would have met the same fate. He obviously couldn't have kidnapped both of us on his own, as my brother was a fairly strong fellow. That meant he had other pedophile partners who would help him snatch up unsuspecting kids. Unfortunately, they were never able to catch any of the sick fucks who did this to the child. But the man was definitely not his father. His real parents had already been searching for their missing son for almost a month. The pedophile had managed to kidnap the poor kid and used him as their puppet to try and kidnap other children. Every time I think about the boy, I feel a deep pity for him. He was only a year younger than I was at the time, and I can only imagine how terrible it must be to slowly starve to death. Alright, that wraps up the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot. Also, leave a comment below with your thoughts on the video. I basically read every comment, and if it's good enough, I'll respond to it, so make sure to leave a comment and I'll try to get back to you. Thanks for watching. It means a lot. Until next time, see ya.